When are we gonna see women in the UFC, man?
Never.
There are many UFC champions who have had a downfall, but there is none as spectacular, viral, and delusional than that of Ronda Rousey. Right?
Your striking has accelerated in these giant jumps.
This video is going to tell the whole, complete story, from her rise to her fall and everything in between. It wouldn't be a story of a rise of a legend if it didn't start in darkness.
Ronda's dad broke his back. It was just a freak accident. We were sledding. He ended up, instead of going down and up the next hill, somehow sliding across and going feet first into the opposite hill.
He happened to have a really rare blood disorder.
As a result, he really didn't heal, and it got worse and worse and worse.
Eventually he said, you're gonna be a paraplegic and then a quadriplegic, and then you're gonna die. And there's nothing we can do about it.
He didn't want us to suffer with him.
My dad decided to take matters in his own hands because he was in a huge amount of pain every day. He couldn't work anymore. He felt like he was just a drag on the family.
So he went to this pond we used to drive out to. We used to skip rocks on it and stuff.
And he put a hose in the exhaust. I was 8 years old.
He told everybody, and he told me that I was meant to be something extraordinary. You know, I was gonna win the Olympics, I could be president, I could be anything. I believed him because when you're 8 years old, your dad's right about everything.
That little 8-year-old girl, at such a young age, would set her sights on sports. First, she would dip her toe in the world of swimming before transitioning to the sport that her mother had pioneered in, judo.
I did judo with the intention of winning the Olympics in it because he told me I could.
Anna Marie DeMars was an incredible judo talent and was the first American woman to win gold at the World Judo Championships. Ronda would find equal success, and over the years with her mother at her side, would climb to the top of the sport, from gold at the World Juniors Championship to multiple medals in the Pan American Championships, and then finally, she would cap off her esteemed career, securing bronze at the 2008 Olympic Games at the age of just 21. But it was after the Olympics that Ronda would become lost. Despite fulfilling her father's prophecy of becoming an Olympic-level athlete and reaching the pinnacle of her sport, she faced that same grim reality as all the other athletes who pursue that impossible dream of 5 rings. They end up broke, with no money, and aimless. Ronda, despite being a judoka hero, would find herself having to work 3 jobs as a cocktail waitress, awaiting a new avenue to make ends meet. And that is when one woman in 2009, 1 year removed from the Olympics, would be a light in that darkness for Ronda.
I think you couldn't find a better face for female mixed martial arts.
No, you're the OG.
Thank you.
In terms of women's MMA, who the fuck is more OG than you?
The first women's MMA fight I saw was her and Julie Kedzie.
Right.
So I would not have even known it was an option for me. She's the one that planted the seed in my mind.
Gina Carano had been competing in MMA since 2006, and by the time that Ronda had seen her, she had compiled a record of 7-1, losing to future legend of the sport Chris Cyborg. Gina had been largely regarded as the face of women's MMA. Her fighting style and her looks had meant that she had brought more eyes than ever to the women's side of MMA, a subsection of the sport that had not really gained any traction. Men just wanted to see other men beat the shit out of each other and regarded women as too weak and not bloodthirsty enough to be entertaining. That was until Gina had started to change people's minds, and alongside Cyborg had brought a lot of attention to the game. And soon after seeing Gina make that legendary run inside of the cage, Ronda would walk into that dingy lit boxing gym of Glendale Fighting Club and set her sights on her amateur debut as a mixed martial artist.
Just come immediately, slips out to the armbar. Beautiful transition. It's locked in, and that's extended, and that's the fight. Armbar again, and it's deep. Done.
That is the end, ladies and gentlemen. Seconds.
The blue corner, Ronda Rousey.
What's your quickest armbar, your quickest tap out?
My quickest one, I think, is 23 seconds.
Good Lord have mercy.
Yeah, like my first, what was it? 6 fights or 5 fights, 6 fights, including the amateurs. They were all in the first round under a minute.
A lot of time went into researching and making this video about Ronda, and none of that would have been possible without the paid partner of this video, BetterHelp. Therapy has always been one of those things that I feel doesn't get discussed enough, and I know that for me personally, I wouldn't be where I am or who I am without it. As viewers of this channel know by now, I'm a big believer in tackling those less discussed subjects and highlighting the darker moments of the athletes that we love to watch so much. It allows us to connect and to know that we're not alone in our struggles. But therapy is also an important part of the process of becoming more healthy and allowing us to grow as individuals and to challenge ourselves mentally. For me personally, therapy was able to allow me to connect with myself and understand how all of the cogs turn up there, which without a doubt allowed me to become happier and healthier. I have family members who have been using BetterHelp for a long time now, and they've all talked about how embarking on that mental health journey has drastically improved their lives. BetterHelp really strips away a lot of the problems that can come with seeking a therapist. There's no need to search your local area, calling offices or sending emails. The whole process of finding your therapist can be done online. You can head to the site using my link betterhelp.com/mixedmartial, and after signing up, you'll be taken through a quiz which allows you to pinpoint where you are at mentally. From there, BetterHelp will narrow down a therapist, personalized for you out of their massive network of tens of thousands of credentialed professionals. You'll find matches usually within 48 hours. Then from there, it's as simple as reaching out to your therapist through any means that you feel comfortable with, from messaging to phone calls and video calls, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/mixedmartial or choose Mixed Martial Academic during sign up and enjoy a special discount for your first month of 10%. Thanks again to BetterHelp. Ronda would prove to be a freight train in women's MMA, plowing through the competition in a matter of seconds per fight. Her Olympic expertise in judo had led to 7 finishes, all under a minute via armbar, leaving her with a 4-0 professional record and 3-0 as an amateur. Ronda had signed with Strikeforce, the premier organization for females, and after 2 incredible performances, she had put herself in prime position for a shot at the title against current reigning female bantamweight champion Miesha Tate. The pair would quickly become rivals, and there was nothing like a phone call with Ariel Helwani to add fuel to the fire.
So let me ask you this. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen next, but there is a lot of talk that it may be Ronda Rousey. Do you think that's fair?
Fair? No. You know, I mean, when she starts beating girls that are ranked in the top 10 at 135, you know, then maybe we can start thinking about her getting a title shot at that weight.
I think one of her main complaints has been that I'm not ranked and I haven't earned my spot or whatever. But you know what? This is the UFC. Their job is to put together the fights that the fans want to see the most, and that's going to make their events the most money. It's 100% that a fight between me and her needs to happen. It'll be great for women's MMA. It'd be the first highly anticipated women's title fight in a very long time.
It's because you're pretty and you have a mouth that you've been running.
I'm not just pretty. I actually have an Olympic medal.
I'm trying to have women accepted more for us as athletes. I want it to be more like the Olympics because I have a tremendous amount of respect for all those athletes.
But every time you talk about me getting a title shot, you say it's only because of my looks, and you're not saying that my Olympic medal bears any kind of credibility.
The exchange between the pair would develop some much needed hype for the fight, and Ronda was right about one thing. The fight would be the biggest to grace women's MMA at the time, and so naturally, Dana White, the owner of Strikeforce, would put the fight together.
Things first, any truth to the rumor that you got this fight, that Strikeforce booked this fight? They offered it to you after seeing you on my show, and you sort of stated your case and you convinced them, and that's the only reason why you got this fight. Any truth to that rumor?
No, there's zero truth to that.
I think that what she's done has all been about her and marketing herself, and she's talked her way into a title fight, in my opinion. You know, she's not the #1 contender at 135. The thing about Ronda is that, you know, she's a very, kind of a self-righteous person. You know, she cares more about herself than she does about the sport of women's MMA.
I don't really have much respect for the inconsistency of her comments. You know, one day she's like, oh yeah, I totally respect your Olympic medal, and another day she's like, oh yeah, it's not a legitimate medal. Or one day she's like, oh, she's only getting the title shot because she's pretty. And then she's like, oh, well, and she's only getting the title shot because she talked her way into it. And then before that, she's like, oh, well, it should just be about, you know, your record and just how you fight and nothing else. But then at the same time, she's got a picture of herself in booty shorts on her page. I don't have much respect for the inconsistency of her attitude. It seems to kind of reflect that she has a little bit of a weak personality.
The
thing is, you know, she's going to have to own up to it. You know what I mean? She's going to have to put her money where her mouth is. So she's talking all this game, and she's going to look like an idiot if she can't back it up. Ronda comes in here, and I just really want to knock her head right off her block.
She is still undefeated. She is the new Strikeforce Women's World Bantamweight Champion.
In a fight that is quite literally too gruesome to show on YouTube, Ronda would snap Misha's arm towards the end of the first round, carrying on Ronda's undefeated career and streak of first round armbars. With it, Ronda had gone full circle, completing the dream of Gina, the woman that had inspired her in the first place. Ronda's rise to the top of the pile in Strikeforce had caught the attention of Dana White, and to be fair to the UFC president, his original comments were made back in 2011.
We're going to see women in the UFC, man.
Never.
Never?
Never.
When there was hardly any financial or popularity reason to bring women into the company. Ultimately, it's a business, and despite the noise that Cyborg and Gina had created, it was simply a drop in the ocean compared to the men who had been dominating the sport up until that point. But Ronda had changed everything.
Because now I think that you kind of really validated women in UFC because you're so good. There wasn't a real Ronda Rousey beforehand we could say, okay, we can compare it to, and they're a beast. Now you're a beast.
She talked the talk. She walked the walk. Dana was beginning to slightly change his tune when it came to bringing females into the fold, but Ronda still had to prove herself, and so in her first defense as Strikeforce champion, she would defeat the original champ, Sarah Kaufman, doing so in similar fashion as all those other females who had tried to snatch the O from her record, under a minute and via an armbar. Around this time, the UFC had decided to dissolve Strikeforce, bringing across the entire roster of males into the UFC, but the question was, what would happen to the females? Well, Dana had a choice. Either do the unthinkable and allow women to step into the octagon, or the expected result of sending them packing to Invicta FC. With a potential superstar on his hands in the form of Ronda, I'm sure this decision would have caused some rather tense business meetings, but the end of the year would bring the MMA world its answer.
I'm gonna make it official right now. The first ever UFC Women's Champion, Ronda Rousey. She'll be fighting Liz Carmouche, and she is the main event.
We're bringing in the 135-pound division. That's what we're doing. I'm trying this whole women's thing out.
You know, since I made this fight, I mean, some of these guys still live in the 1920s. The way that they talk about women, these women deserve to be here. They're great athletes.
She's already getting media that we've never even got before. And she's never even set foot in the UFC yet. She is a huge star. You know, she gets more media than anybody else out there. She's the reason that I was interested in doing this.
When Ronda Rousey steps to the octagon at UFC 157, she truly makes a mark in history.
Anytime Ronda Rousey fights, it's truly an event. She's the kind of person who really you can compare to Mike Tyson.
So Liz, what was it like getting that phone call saying that you're going to be one of the first 2 female athletes in the UFC?
And I used to have this policy that I didn't touch my phone until 9 a.m.
All right, so what happened the morning that you did finally look at the phone then? Was there 50 messages from?
Oh yeah. From my coaches to Leg.
Like, we've been trying to get a hold of you. The UFC called, they want you to fight against Ronda Rousey. Do you want to take that fight? Yes, of course I do.
I'm not scared. There's nothing that I can do, nothing be done in the cage that compares to anything I experienced in Iraq.
Ronda would be stepping in the cage against Liz Carmouche at UFC 157, a former Marine who had done 3 tours of Iraq. Ronda and Liz were poised to make history, and it's hard to put into words just how groundbreaking it was to have these women stand atop a pay-per-view.
I'm going to retire undefeated, and there's nothing any of these girls can do about it. They can try. They're welcome to try, but it's just not happening.
And I had friends outside that never watched the sport, and they were watching the Ronda fight, and that's when I knew that, oh, this is really big.
She break an arm tomorrow?
It can happen right
so
there.
Tomorrow we're going to see some real excitement tomorrow.
These girls are the best in the world and impressive to watch. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't the right thing.
They want to talk to her. People were mad when we went below 155, and then, oh, they're going to go below 145, and oh, now they're bringing in women? Shut up.
It was energetic. It was palpable. You could actually feel like your hair standing up. I mean, it's just to feel the excitement about the first ever inaugural fight in the UFC. And that's something I always carry with me.
134.6 for the champion, Ronda Rousey. UFC fans, the Octagon has returned to Orange County.
This is a gigantic cultural moment, Mike, and this is not just a moment for Ronda Rousey. This is a moment for women's sports, period. Ronda's face is getting twisted. Carmouche trying to shock the world. Carmouche has got it.
Down where I have teeth marks actually from getting on her mouth, thinking that maybe I could get her to tap just by knocking some teeth out.
This is the armbar position. She's got her in a spider web.
More pressure.
She's looking for it. She got it. It's all over. That wasn't a gimme by any stretch of the imagination.
The UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion of the World.
Ronda would submit the former Marine inside the first round, but not before being put in a choke that looked like it was about to end the fight. Liz would also take Rousey the furthest she had ever gone in her professional career, but it didn't matter. The female bantamweight champ would collect another armbar finish. 7 victories, 7 armbars, 7 first round finishes. The question was, what was next? Despite the fact that these two females had pioneered the women's bantamweight division, there was no one else, and so now new contenders would have to be brought into the fold. The UFC would sign undefeated Kat Zingano and former Strikeforce title holder Miesha Tate, and the two would square off in the cage for the #1 contenders spot. In a fight of the night performance, Zingano would continue her undefeated ways and TKO Miesha in the 3rd round, securing herself a shot against Ronda. The pair would be scheduled as the first female coaches of The Ultimate Fighter, a season which would include a mixed cast of women and male fighters.
And Miesha comes walking in. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. I'm here to coach.
You're here to coach?
I am.
Coach what?
I think I'll leave the explaining to Dana, but...
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Where is he at?
So last week I got a call from Kat Zingano and her people, and basically she was training, getting ready for The Ultimate Fighter to come here and coach, and she blew her ACL.
She's literally in surgery right now, having surgery right this minute. Your buddy graciously stepped up and said she would love to coach this season of The Ultimate Fighter.
#1 contender Kat Zingano would damage her knee a few weeks out from filming, meaning that the UFC had to bring in Miesha Tate to fill in as Ronda's dance partner. Ronda and Miesha didn't exactly like each other considering how things had gone in the build-up to their first fight, and so this season was destined to become heated. The thing that people were not expecting was what Ronda was like under constant surveillance. The animosity between the pair was undeniable, but Miesha did her best to smile and wave for the camera. Ronda, on the other hand, would prove to be the exact opposite.
Me and Miesha were meant to be rivals, and I'm meant to retain this belt. Come on, guys. 6 o'clock. You know the schedule. You should get here earlier if you want to stay later.
Stupid that she's barging in like right at 6 o'clock. Her team's not even on the mat and she's already trying to boot us out of there.
It says that she hits better the Caraway than I do with you.
You don't know.
Doesn't need to be so close to him.
You don't know.
Man, do it at the right time.
Nothing to do with you.
Do it at the right time. All the way down. They're digging in December too, honey. Get used to it.
Ronda's personality on the show would start to crack that esteemed public perception she had built up, and unsurprisingly, a lot of fans started to turn against her, something that, at the premiere of the season, Dana and Ronda seemed acutely aware might happen.
Like you're saying, you're anxious to see this. You've already been vocal about the fact that you've said, oh, I think people are going to think I'm crazy, you know, and you're maybe worried about how it's going to come out. But at the same time, shouldn't both of you guys be psyched to own who you are? And
you know what? I don't want to talk for her, answer for her, but she can answer for herself. But you have to understand, it's totally different than opening yourself up and living on camera for for 5 or 6 weeks, and as when you're caught up in the moment, you do things, and as you just reflect and think back on them, you're like, Jesus Christ, this is going to be on TV in front of the whole world. And
how could people possibly know who you are from a couple clips of a video that people are seeing out of context? And so I'm just preparing for people to get a worse idea of who I am.
Despite how Ronda's personality had been negatively taken, the hype around her matchup against Miesha was in full swing, and after their time spent bickering on the TV show, the girls were scheduled to face each other as the co-main event of UFC 198. Ronda wanted to put to bed the rivalry with Miesha once and for all, and their season of Tough had brought new eyes to the warfare that they were about to put on display.
Title on the line, the champion, the challenger.
You ready? You ready? Let's go, come on.
That's what she's got to look out for, is getting taken down by Ronda. If she can get that arm out of there, she's got to get that left arm out of danger.
Still working for
She's
it.
in trouble.
Oh,
She's
no,
in it.
it's
She
all
taps.
over.
She taps.
Ronda Rousey remains the UFC
After Ronda's destruction of Misha, the UFC had a surprise announcement at the post-fight press conference.
Rousey versus McMahon, February. That's the headliner.
And that's a fast turnaround.
She goes right back into camp.
Dana actually approached me about this before this fight.
The bout with Sarah McMahon was poised to be Rowdy's greatest threat, Olympic wrestler versus Olympic judoka.
Olympian versus Olympian, with Ronda's judo and Sarah's Olympic wrestling experience.
There are very few human beings that know how hard Olympic wrestlers work out. She is the most physically dominant person Ronda Rousey has ever faced in her career, without doubt.
Go. Rousey, McMahon. Here we go. To that spot. Clutching by both legs. Here we go. Ronda swinging over.
And Ronda's clinching up.
Looking to finish it.
I thought she's demolishing the best of the best women. She's like that. She could take a man. She could, who knows what she could do.
Her finishes were putting her name on the tip of everyone's tongue. Not only fight fans, but she was going mainstream.
So I thought Ronda Rousey was Mike Tyson for a little bit there.
Ronda Rousey. Alexis Davis.
Good overhead right by Ronda.
And a big throwdown. Can she do it right here? It's all over. Just like that. Are you kidding me?
In Ronda's fifth defense of the UFC Women's Bantamweight Championship, she would take on undefeated Kat Zingano. After Rowdy had dispatched Misha Tate once again by armbar, her next three opponents would all be defeated in a combined time of 1 minute and 36 seconds, collecting herself the two fastest finishes in women's UFC history, a record to this day that still stands true. Although these women that had stood in Ronda's path were pitched as Ronda's next greatest threat, of which two were undefeated, Rousey just walked right through them. The fact that the finishes were so quick and so spectacular only increased their virality. Ronda's finishes were algorithmically aligned with the dopamine-depleted TikTok and Instagram generation, and so naturally her name started to grow roots in about every household. Like her or not, she was becoming an international star. She would quickly transcend the sport into the mainstream, appearing on late-night talk shows and the front covers of popular magazines, and then even would transition to Hollywood itself. Everywhere she went, fans adored her, and on top of it all, her astonishing victories in the octagon was the catalyst for more women than ever to begin training in MMA. She stood for something greater than being a champion. She was rightfully people's idol. It was in complete contrast with a fair bunch of MMA hardcores though, fans who had watched Ronda on Tough and in subsequent media events were turned off by her attitude and arrogance. This was something that Ronda had expected though. She had always claimed that she was seen as the villain in her judo career, and so being viewed in the same light by MMA fans was just more of the same. Outside of our relatively small niche of the fight game, she was seen as the badass feminine icon, a figure to show that women can be strong and tough. News stations and magazines clamored to have her grace their publications, and she took every opportunity she could. But there was also one discussion circulating this time that was of concern, something that has grown into perhaps the greatest topic surrounding the legacy of Ronda Rousey, and that is the fact that the judoka Olympian had fallen in love with striking, and this is no small part to those people around her, from Joe Rogan to Dana White.
You were fucking hitting mitts, and I was like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck is going on in your gym? Because your striking has accelerated in these giant jumps to someone who looks like a fucking world champion kickboxer. Like this is
she
crazy
wins the
shit.
boxing world champion any given day. I always say that. Professional boxing, her weight class 135 pounder, she would destroy them.
Here it is right here on the big screen. Fucking speed is retarded.
How do you think you would do against these girls in boxing? Would you go into boxing to fight these girls? Or
Honestly,
yeah.
Honestly, I think I could beat them all boxing too.
Retarded.
Used to be a pure rapper. Look how good her hands are. Yeah, no, I saw that. She's really doing good stuff.
I know the level of my striking is at, and that's one of the advantages that I have is they don't really know. There's so little footage of me out there.
This fascination with her hands was only bolstered by her last few fights, 2 of which had ended due to strikes, and so that constant frenzy of bootlickers that surrounded Ronda had planted a seed that she was an incredible striker, no longer that one-trick pony that everyone thought she was. The problem was that anyone with a pair of eyes could see that she looked like one of those wobbly arm things on the side of the road. Whilst Ronda's longtime coach Edmund had certainly improved Ronda's striking and made her a credible threat with multiple avenues to finishing a fight, what was concerning about this talk of her having great hands was that it served as a distraction in game planning. There is no doubt in my mind that Ronda would now be seeking knockouts or even unconcerned about clinching as soon as possible, and so rather than concentrating on the very thing that got her to the dance in the first place, her judoka, she would want to stand and bang. This subject, and her coach Edmund, has definitely been over-discussed and over-analysed, but this development of her striking and the fantasy of how great it was is relevant to what is to come in the story. I won't be concentrating on Edmund much beyond this part of the video though. In the midst of Ronda's star power emanating into popular culture, the questions of whether Ronda was distracted would soon find their answer. A fight would quickly grab every fibre of her attention, an undefeated Brazilian, which had been tearing through the ranks of the bantamweight division. But these weren't just any women. Ronda had put together a team of female fighters who were considered pioneers of the sport. This team was dubbed the 4 Horsewomen of MMA, and Betch had been slowly taking them out one by one, counting down after every victory. The final course, Ronda herself. This dismantling of Ronda's closest teammates frustrated her, and so she called Dana to fast-track Coher to the Lion's Den. Rousey wanted to make an example of her, but that initial frustration with Betch, whilst just competitive in nature, was about to become extremely personal and make one of the greatest pre-fight build-ups the women's division would ever know.
She started saying things like, "I really just hope she doesn't herself," and starts laughing. It's a very well-known and documented fact that my father himself. That's not fight promotion. She's disrespected the greatest tragedy that my family has ever gone through and laughed at it. And I don't forget things like that. I don't forgive things like that. I'm going to make sure that that girl does not leave that cage looking the same way that she did walking in. I don't just want her to be beaten, I want her to be embarrassed. Just because my body was developed for a purpose other than fucking millionaires doesn't mean it's masculine. I think it's femininely badass as fuck because there's not a single muscle on my body that isn't for a purpose because I'm not a do-nothing bitch.
Ronda would dispatch Betch in destructive and brutal fashion. The Brazilian would slump face down unconscious within just 30 seconds, rather ironic considering what Betch had been saying in the build-up to the fight, and to rub salt even further into the wound, Ronda would continue her iconic ways and would repeat what Betch had been screaming in her face during the weigh-ins: "Don't cry." Betch would never be the same again after the fight, winning just 2 of her next 8, with another first-round finish in her undefeated career. There was little doubt that what we were all witnessing was the dominant reign of the greatest female fighter the Earth had ever seen.
Well, I consider the matter settled, and that I'm not going to have to think about her ever again after this day. And I'm sure she'll have to think about me plenty. And so, as far as I'm concerned, it's over and done with.
2015 was the culmination of Ronda's star power. That devastating, cathartic and viral destruction of Betch Coher, and that enigmatic line of being a do-nothing bitch, had fueled an even deeper dive into the mainstream. From Hollywood blockbusters to ESPYs to late-night talk shows, Ronda was it, and 2015 was her year. That rise was in parallel with newly minted interim featherweight champion Conor McGregor, and these two in beautiful synchronicity had catapulted MMA into the stratosphere. It was during this very time that the sport had even wormed its way into my bland and bleak life. Conor's viral trash talk and Ronda's streak of freaky fast finishes had managed to land on my YouTube homepage, and to my unawoken and unconscious MMA mind, these two athletes were unbeatable, undeniable, but perhaps most importantly, shepherds for the unanointed and uneducated sheep. They were guiding their virgin flock to the heavenly and blood-soaked land of MMA. Hell, at that point, I'm pretty sure I thought Ronda could beat Cain Velasquez under the right circumstances. It's hard to put into words what this time in MMA was. 2015, without a shadow of a doubt, was a turning point. Hordes of new fans were piling in, and with all that hype and all those new eyes, the end of the year would be Dana White's chance to capitalize. So two of the most important fights of this era were booked. Conor would start a global press tour alongside featherweight goat Jose Aldo, which, well, what hasn't been said about that already? And Ronda would get a new and exciting dance partner, a credible threat to her throne in the form of multi-world champion boxer Holm. She had transferred across successfully into MMA, made it into the UFC undefeated, and then had two bland yet successful performances inside of the octagon. Naturally, many still felt that this was just another lamb being led to the slaughterhouse, another arm for Ronda to snap off, but Rousey knew that Holly posed a credible threat to her throne and took the challenge seriously. The event itself was massive, booking the Docklands Stadium in Melbourne, and not only had the UFC managed to pull off filling an entire stadium with the largest audience attendance in the history of the promotion, with over 56,000 people there to watch the spectacle, but they had done it with an unprecedented women's main and co-main event, putting another accolade in the trailblazing legacy of Ronda, and all that was left to do was to notch one more win in her deepening legacy.
And I want to show the world why I am the best, and I still have more to prove, and Holly is one more person that I want to prove myself against. She's the type of fighter that you have to be very, very patient with. I feel like she's going to try and keep distance and keep far away from me and get me frustrated, and to a point I'll make a mistake and she can try and kick me in the head, but it's not going to go like that. Not the way she wants.
She's the one that put the fist on my face. I didn't touch her. She's the one that touched me, and I told her that fake sweet act is, I see right through it. I really do. It was all fake. All until now. All that respect, all that everything, all you being sweet, I see right now that it's fake, and you're going to get it on Sunday. You're not the first person that thought that you had the perfect plan to beat me. It's not the first time your camp thought that they had the perfect plan to beat me. I'm going to show you on Sunday why I'm the champ.
Beautiful. Beautiful. She's hurt. She's in trouble. She's hurt. Holly looking to finish. Holly is the new UFC heavyweight champion of the world.
Oh my God!
Unbelievable. For the first time in Ronda's MMA career, she would taste defeat, knocked out in the second round after being outgunned the entire fight by Holly. The knockout would go viral, and many felt satisfied seeing Ronda get laid out unconscious. Her antics at the weigh-in and her attitude to people in the last couple of years of stardom finally got humbled, or so people thought. People would eagerly anticipate Ronda's reaction after losing her belt and that undefeated record, the thing that she so desperately wanted to cling onto into retirement. She would be transported to the hospital after the fight and not available for the post-fight press conference. But then, well, there was nothing. Ronda would escape the country, face covered and paparazzi converging, disappearing into silence. It was a little strange, and it's not something fans of this sport were accustomed to. For such a high-profile star to not address a loss is extremely odd, and whilst Ronda didn't owe anything to anyone, it was still frustrating nonetheless. But then after 3 months of complete silence from Ronda, she would do perhaps her most infamous interview. She would finally address the loss, speaking with Ellen on her talk show. It was a difficult thing to watch. She would talk of how she had considered ending things early because she was so devastated, but also of how she wanted to make a return to show everyone that you should pick yourself up after defeats and keep on fighting. The problem was that she also decided it would be a good opportunity to start layering in excuses as to why she lost that fight, something that was immediately met with resistance from fans. Then on top of that, she tried to paint an inspiring story of how she still considers herself undefeated because losing is a choice.
I'm still undefeated because being defeated is a choice.
Which, as Sean O'Malley knows best, is a great way to piss off a lot of fans. So instead of people resonating with a fair mentality, she would be lampooned by fight fans, calling her delusional and out of touch. After giving no props to the woman that had just beaten her, Ronda would disappear once more, and it was that silence and disregard for the fans that started to breed contempt in the space. Holly would only end up being champion for a fleeting period, and it was only in her first defense 4 months later that she would be choked out in the 5th round at UFC 196 by Miesha Tate, and in much the same way, Miesha 4 months removed from her career high would be submitted in the first round by Amanda Nunes at UFC 200. Ronda's story, a microcosm projected 1,000 times, in 1,000 different defeats. I also just want to take the time to say that a lot of effort is put into making these videos, and at the time of making it, only 15% of you guys are subscribed, and so it would really mean a lot if you could support the development of this channel and these types of videos by subscribing, liking or commenting, but only if you are enjoying yourself and feel like this is the type of stuff you want to see on the platform. Thank you, and it helps like you couldn't imagine. And then, in the waning months of the year, and almost a year removed from the Holm fight, it was finally announced.
The major announcement, Dana White.
Ronda Rousey is back. She will fight December 30th for the title.
UFC 207 would mark the return of Ronda, and while she appeared littered throughout the marketing of the event, she was distinctly absent from any media coverage whatsoever. No press conferences, no pre-fight press scrums. She wasn't even in the countdown episode. Ronda didn't want anything to do with the media, or even the fans. It was weird, especially considering Conor had just been kicked off of UFC 200 for this very thing. It was preferential treatment, but ultimately it didn't matter. People wanted to see if Ronda could return and carry on that awe-inspiring career.
We all kind of wanted to see if she could return to being the person that she was before the Holly knockout.
What is this pounding in my chest? Weighed down by your content. Just killing time in retrospect. But in your wake I must confess.
But she went in there against Amanda Nunes and could not for the life of her defend a 1-2.
And I just got tapped and I was out. You know, even if I was out on my feet, I was out.
I just think that Amanda had a complete disregard for Ronda's ability to strike after watching her fight Holly Holm. She just got completely just ran through by Amanda Nunes.
The Ronda that stepped into the octagon that night was a shell of herself. She looked tense and rigid, whereas Amanda was smiling, loose and ready to take the fight to the legend that stood in front of her. The first punch that had landed on Rousey took everything out of her, and from there, Amanda would not relent. And that silence that Ronda had entered UFC 207 with would be the exact same one that she left the sport with. After being one of the most discussed and viral stars of the sport and an internationally recognized female, she dissipated into nothing after this second loss, gone without a trace. A legacy in some sense lasts forever. Carrying the weight of its expectations isn't easy. In a lot of ways it defines an athlete. It swallows them whole. Ronda had clung desperately onto the belief that she would retire undefeated. Being a champion was everything she identified as. Without it, Rousey thought that the only option that made sense was to end things early. Thankfully, she would pick herself up and would try one more shot at UFC gold, but Amanda would be a bull in a china shop, destroying Rousey in dominant and aggressive fashion. Rousey would never return to MMA, leaving the sport after 2 losses, but she would quickly find a new home in the WWE, and whilst that is something I know very little about, a quick Google search tells you everything you need to know. She ostracized herself once more from the fans, and after a brief stay at the very top of the sport, she once again disappeared out of the mainstream. I had been making this video for the last 4 months, and to my surprise she would crop back up, this time in a series of podcasts aimed at promoting her new book. Instead of creating a buzz for it, she would instead start to elaborate on a series of excuses about her losses.
And the moment that I ran out of fumes was, broadcast live to billions of people everywhere who all had their own assumptions about it, and none of them are right. Even though I know that I'm better than all these girls and by a fucking long shot.
It was these excuses that started a social media content machine, grinding out a new series of videos tearing her apart once again for refusing to accept that she was beaten fairly by incredible athletes, even going as far as to say she is the greatest female fighter of all time, it's just her brain couldn't handle it anymore, which we know is a very real possibility in this sport. We have seen it time and time again, but there are ways and means to go about making that point without throwing your opponents under the bus. Ronda's following over the course of the last 7 to 8 years has completely fallen off because of this attitude, and now even more stories creep up from the weeds, ones that paint her as an arrogant and rude egomaniac, and her response to all of this once again isn't personal responsibility or any kind of apology. Instead, it's the fans' fault again. While she would deservedly and rightfully make her way into the UFC Hall of Fame, the way she had carried herself had meant that she isn't loved or cherished like other legends of this sport, which is just a massive shame considering what she has done and how incredible and spectacular her fights were. Instead, she'll more than likely be remembered as delusional and humiliated. I hope in a lot of ways this video can shine a spotlight on her accomplishments and what that feeling was like as she rose to be a generational star. The thing is, a legacy fuels the rise of another. They feed into each other, an Ouroboros of triumph and victory, a sport fueled by defeat and conquest. With her win against Ronda, Nunes had started what would be her ascension to claim the mantle of the greatest female fighter of all time, a legacy built on the ruins of Ronda's rather complicated one. There is no doubt that Rousey had catapulted female fighters into the mainstream, and had brought more eyes to the octagon than any woman competitor before her, one of the biggest pay-per-view sellers of all time. A sentiment that even to this day remains true, despite how many legends like Nunes and Valentina have since followed. All that fame and idolization by fight fans leaked into the mainstream, which led to movie roles, front covers and talk shows. Yet in the wake of her losses, she used that platform to tear down everything she could have had. Her reluctance to address the media, her excuses, and her disregard to the fan base turned a lot of people off. Personally, I don't really care what she says, how she says it, or why she says it. I think that being the greatest in a sport leads to some quirks, arrogance, or whatever it may be, and so I often let it slide, but I can't extend that perspective to everybody, and so I do empathize with those who feel let down by an athlete they have supported for so long. In her moments of vulnerability, it's hard not to feel sympathetic for her though. No one deserves to feel so low that they consider anything of what she was talking about. But in the same breath, it seems pretty obvious that the people who were around her were those who allowed those delusions to exist in the first place. She was praised and admired at every single opportunity. No one ever criticized her, and it's pretty much public knowledge that her coach, Edmund, refused to release his grasp over his star pupil, and that man, in my opinion, is a grifter, a slimy snake oil salesman. During her rise, all of that praise of greatness and invincibility were warranted. She destroyed every single opponent put in her way, and did it in a way that has not been replicated since. And whilst a lot of media or content creators want to retrospectively act like the majority always knew she was a one-trick pony, or that the competition was lacking, is simply a lie. The doubters, the naysayers, and the objectors were a faint whisper in the background of a bellowing, historic legacy. All of the hate nowadays just seems like everyone jumping on a bandwagon because it's trendy or it gets views. But I think that the Weasel said it best. I doubt there are people out there who actually hate Ronda. They just dislike the fact that the criticism leveled at her gets dismissed or considered as hate by her, which just isn't the case. She refused to be humble, to give props to those incredible athletes who carried forth her belt, and that was the problem. Ronda had a duty to pass on the torch and to continue to support the very thing that she is known for being the pioneer for. But in the grand scheme of things, who actually cares? Her delusions, her excuses, or whatever it is, just gets blown way out of proportion every single time. The landscape of MMA is changing with its popularity, and with it, so does the way content is consumed. Fans interact and engage with this sport in new ways. My concern is that there is a lack of content actually showing what it was like during Ronda's rise, what the feeling was, and ultimately putting the truth forth first. And that truth is, everyone thought they were seeing the greatest female athlete of all time rise to the top. All these comments and hate coming her way from fans, media, and content creators is kind of a bit sad for me. It's frustrating when the storyline being painted now is that she only lost when she met credible competition, but the fact is, her resume is littered with either former female champions or future champions, and the ones that aren't beat them anyway, retrospectively changing the fact that Ronda's climb to the top was anything less than exciting or inspiring, and just damn impressive is absurd. Say what you want, but ultimately Ronda did what she was asked, step in the octagon and fight, and everyone fucking loved it.
Everybody knew who she was. Everyone knew what she did. She inspired so many people, so many young women.
Regardless of how people want to paint Ronda in more recent times, her positive impact, not only on the sport, but for women in general, cannot be understated. She led a cultural vanguard, empowering female athletes and women alike.
She's changed the way that we look at women. She's changed the way that women look at themselves. And she's definitely changed the way that little girls look at what's possible.
The things that she did for the sport and for women's fighting in general. Now, if my daughter decides she wants to fight, there's a platform.
She made it so that there was no boundaries between men and women in this sport. We were all fighters.
There is no doubt that Ronda is a pioneer, a person capable of changing this very sport. It's hard for me to look back at her career and in any sense regard it as some kind of failure, or even that she had a downfall. The competition, who more than likely were inspired by Ronda, just finally caught up. But before that, there was 5 years of pure dominance. There was nothing like it, an unprecedented rise that called a new generation of female fighters to the main stage.
I saw like a light in the tunnel that I can do this too in the future.
Her impact is going to be felt for years and years to come. She broke down barriers. She said, we will not be dismissed anymore.
And all we must do is look at the landscape of MMA. There are now 3 women's divisions with 3 champions at the top, all putting on some of the greatest and most exciting fights this sport has to offer. Little girls now have mainstream fighters to look up to and be inspired by, and if it wasn't for Ronda, women would most likely not have the platform that they do today in the UFC. And whilst most chalked up the explosion of MMA to that of Conor, it should never be forgotten that he had an equally capable dance partner bringing the company all the way to $1 billion. Ronda was on the tip of everyone's tongue, and across the globe, people tuned in for her emphatic dominance.
She showed us how big MMA could be.
And so it's safe to say, without Ronda, there is no Amanda Nunes, Joanna, or Valentina. That is what a legacy is. It's passed on, again and again, a cyclical tale reaching out from the ether, told 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, again and again and again and again.
When you talk about pioneers, there is no one who is a bigger pioneer of mixed martial arts than Ronda Rousey.